Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode on Laid Back the Aturizinga podcast. And our topic for this week is entrepreneurship within the BAME community. And our guest for this week is Iheanyi Ibe, who is the entrepreneurship program manager at the University of Hertfordshire here in the UK. Hello, Chief. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome. Is this your first podcast?
I believe so. I think so. Yes. I
really?
think so.
Oh. I actually thought you had done a lot more.
I think so. I've done a few interviews around things like, no. That's right. It's not my first one. During the pandemic, when we were all at home, I did a couple for a couple of sort of business support agencies and one of the Chamber of Commerce in the region where we are. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. But let's before we start, do you have any expectation? I know you've done a podcast before. Like, do you have any expectation?
No, I don't have any expectations. As far as I'm concerned, it's just having an open conversation.
Yeah. Fair, and that's what it's all about, actually. So let's get right into it. Recently, the world has witnessed entrepreneurship boom. All right. So first of all, let's define what entrepreneurship is and why it is important.
I think I'll start by probably talking about enterprise first. I think there's often a lot of confusion about the meaning of both things, or what enterprise means and what entrepreneurship means. So when we talk about enterprise, it's really about the mindset. It is being equipped, just being tooled up and skilled enough, really being innovative in terms of what you're doing, trying to find an enterprising way to do something. It's all about skills, gaining those abilities and attributes to sort of, I guess, be more competitive in life, really, not just in business. Then when we talk about entrepreneurship, what we're then talking about is using those attributes you've developed, those enterprising attributes. If you then decide to use those attributes to develop a venture, that's what entrepreneurship is. So it's using attributes and skills for venture creation. That's entrepreneurship. Often you find words like entrepreneurship with an IN at the very beginning of the word. That's somebody using those skills we've talked about, but within an employed situation, within an organization, being enterprise within an organization. So I just thought I'd make that distinct clarity as to what it is. So in so many ways, entrepreneurship is one of the outcomes of being enterprising, depending on how you use it. And then why is it important? This is a very open question. I think from a personal point of view, I think as a race, human beings as a race, we've been enterprising from day one. And if somebody says to me, why do you say that? I said, because we're still here. Look at how far we've come. You know, and I often think back, I think about, a friend of mine was telling me a story how they bought a flat screen TV when they had their baby. But the baby was a toddler at this point when they got it. And said when they opened it and put it in the living room, the first thing the toddler did was try and swipe it. So that natural inclination of looking at technology, because at this time that's how it is. And they've got that sort of intuition that that's how it should work. Now throw it back, say 200 years ago, for instance, nobody thought about that sort of thing. So you can see how far we've come and being enterprising and evolving and building our society and developing. So I think it is very important. If you look at entrepreneurship itself, I guess as a byproduct of being enterprising, that's really important. If you look at it from a political point of view or an economic point of view, or even from a personal point of view. So if you look at politics, for instance, you're talking about the boom in entrepreneurship. The word enterprise, I think, wasn't quite popular until we had that recession we had a few years back. And then everybody suddenly kicked up and thought, what can we do extra? How can we do things to survive and bring income in? And it's begun, you see that boom going on. If you look at most universities, most higher education institutions these days, it's an absolutely big deal. They use it to sell in institutions. They use it to, it's in policy, for instance. A lot of them write into university policy and objective. So it's become a huge thing over the year. And I think it's here to stay because there's a lot of value from it. If you look at, say, from an economic point of view, for instance, I mean, the options are huge. the amount of input that small businesses, micro businesses, SMEs in this country, or all over the world globally, put into the economy, it's massive. It's huge. I mean, if you think back, every time in the news where we have all these political, economic issues and problems, like things like inflation, things like recession, or even things like big companies folding up, small businesses foot the bill. They foot the bill for these things, and I think the value they provide is quite immense. I was talking about from a personal point of view, for instance. It's an outlet for a lot of people. I mean, we'll probably talk about this later. For instance, not a lot of people go into entrepreneurship by choice. Some people go into it as a practical thing, practical, realistic reason, because of the situations they found themselves in. So that sort of creates a different pathway to it as well. From a skills point of view, employers are looking for people that are commercially aware to employ, not even to start business, just commercially aware. Because what an employer wants is somebody to come into the business and get a fair understanding of how business is run, how decisions are made. What are the factors that drive certain things in an organization. So it makes it a valuable skill to have, I think.
Okay, interesting. When you were making that clarity or disparity between enterprise and entrepreneurship, you kept on mentioning skills, trying as much as possible to develop the skills required to do what you need to do. So what are these important skills that one needs to have to be an entrepreneur?
That's actually a good question, because I think sometimes when you talk about these skills and attributes, people think they're just far off things. They think they're just exotic extra skills you need to have. A lot of these skills we're talking about, so some of them are innate in some people, but a lot of them we use a lot of the time. When I sort of moved from supporting sort of established businesses and SMEs to working with sort of younger people and younger graduates within that was one of the first things I realized. There's a real gap between them identifying what skills they have already and just being able to, what's the term I'm looking for? I guess talk about it when it's needed. So for instance, we look at things like attributes like being able to work in teams, for instance. A lot of this, it's not far-fetched. Being able to communicate properly around what you're doing. Being able to think critically, critical thinking. Being able to manage your time, for instance. So they're not, innovative things. They're there, for instance. Sometimes you speak to a lot of sort of younger people, for instance, and you talk about the skills and they think they don't have it. But then ask them to just give you maybe a brief idea of what they've done in the week, for instance. And everything starts pouring out. By virtue of being on a course, on a degree course, for instance, they're just skills you need to be successful in that course. So you need to hand in things in time, in a timely fashion, for instance. You need to be able to work with other students in terms of what you're doing. That's team building, for instance. Even with that situation of working in a team, you have no choice but to communicate. You've got to share information with other people within that team. So you begin to learn how to communicate, for instance, around it. I think one of these ironic thing tricks life plays on us, I think, is we tend to almost learn things in retrospect. Some of that things have to happen first before we actually learn things around that. So these skills, they're not far-fetched. A lot of the time, the real issue is being able to identify what you have already and build on it and hone that skill. And then be able to apply it when it's required, when it's important, be able to call that skill back and talk about it, or even apply it in terms of what you're doing. The reason I say skills are really important, if you often the example I use when I'm speaking to people from, say, a life science background, I said to them, having skills is like having stem cells. So stem cells can become what they want to become. They end up being different organs, for instance. Having a cache of skills means that you're flexible. Because one thing we're sure about in life is change. It's the one thing we're sure about.
Yeah.
So being able to sit down with somebody, say for instance, and have a conversation about what they want to do in 10 years' time, in so many ways you're taking a gamble. You don't know what that market is going to look like. You just have no idea what's going to happen. But if you've got a cache of skills, it means you're flexible. You're able to adapt whatever that change is. So hence the dwelling on having those attributes, because you can use them whichever way you want. You know, we've talked about example of using it to create a venture, using it to get employment, just developing your skills, being able to be flexible and adapt as the environment changes.
Interesting. Well, let's link it to immigration now and the entrepreneurship to immigration. Because for some reason, I noticed immigrants, even if we take it back to the Italian mafia, how they moved to New York in the 1920s and changed and turned Las Vegas into a city. And then if you look at people like Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, Elon Musk, Arianna Huffington of the Huffington Post, you realize that most of these guys are immigrants. Why do you think like immigrants tend to delve into entrepreneurship more than others?
I think mindset plays a big role. You know, earlier on we started the conversation, I was talking about how sometimes people get into things like this by choice. Other times you don't have a choice. Situation stipulates that you do that. Yeah. So a lot of migrants, you know, if you're a migrant, I know somebody, you know, people often migrate by choice, but I'm just using a paintbrush now to paint everyone, so forgive me. So by virtue of being a migrant, it means you're just trying to live somewhere else or somewhere you think might be beneficial to you, I guess, in so many ways. So you're already leaving something behind where you feel opportunities are less. You've had to learn a different way to adapt in that environment. So that, you know, the mindset is there already. You know, the hard work to put into it is there already. Then if you then migrate somewhere new, whichever way you look at it, there's going to be a little bit of barriers for you because you've come from somewhere else. Even if it's just not understanding how things work, you know, to start with, not having those networks, not having the connections, and that whole perception of as well that you've come from somewhere else, you often become competition for somebody, you know, who's thinking that way around it. So if you then have all these barriers and there's a lot of resistance to you being able to be, I guess, get the opportunities that the locals have, you often don't have a choice but to find a non-traditional way to make a living. You know, so if you put someone in a situation where they're trying to get employment for like 5 or whatever amount of time and they're really struggling, traditional employment, they might just think, actually, you know, I've got too many issues with this, maybe I've got no choice but to start something that's we've all got to make a living. So I think it's a complicated question, but I think the factors are quite varied. There'll be different things around why that is. But again, you know, when we talk about things like diversity, that's why things like that become quite important, because having that mix of people from different backgrounds, different lives, brings so much to the table. So you can see things from a wider perspective as opposed to just similar type things. It makes it a little bit more competitive around things. I mean, I'll just give a simple example. So if somebody comes from a place where things are quite difficult and they're quite used to being resourceful, if you then bring them to an environment where there's a lot of resource, you know, somebody like that is probably in a better position to sort of bring the cost of your resource down because they know how to do things on a tight budget already, because that's what they're used to.
Interesting. But since immigrants have this affinity towards entrepreneurship, so now I'm thinking, like within the Black and ethnic minority community that we're looking at, what is the entrepreneurship boom like in this community?
It's a tricky one. There are challenges, and I find a lot of the challenges from the BAME community reflect the challenges they have in society in general. I think around it. There's a few research papers out there. There was one I read recently. I think it was from the. I need to get this. I think the British Business Bank did kind of. They wrote a paper on entrepreneurship and diversity in the UK anyway. But some of the findings they got from it is quite similar to other reports. But there are a few barriers there when it comes to BAME. And one of the highest ones you find in a report is around access to things like finance, for instance. But there's a lot of factors around. Actually, I'll talk about some of the barriers really. So, in terms of, if you look at example, after starting the business, black business owners, their turnover is something. I think that it had an average of £25,000 compared to about £35,000 for their white business owner counterparts, for instance. I think it says something like that only half of black entrepreneurs meet their non-financial aims compared to about 70% of their white counterparts. But there are factors like socioeconomic backgrounds, where people have come from. I think they found that if you come from an affluent, sorry about that. People who come from an affluent background tend to be more successful in running businesses, and the other way around. But finance is a real problem, having access to finance. Even within that context, for instance, the whole BAME community, so black business women find it actually harder. Within that whole context of it. For instance, so if you look at the financing around women in business, a lot of VCs, venture capitalists, for instance, are men. So not a lot of female representative around that. So it becomes quite tricky. But one thing I can say for them is they're a very resilient bunch. So if you look at things like people trying to start businesses on social media, for instance, predominantly women, for instance. So if you look at that, so the resilience is quite there, but there needs to be a sort of level playing field to try and support them a little bit better.
Yeah. So, you mentioned the journal you read. I think you said it's British something bank. Yeah. The funny thing is, I read an article on Forbes magazine recently, and the author was saying something like that historically that black entrepreneurs, they are faced with challenges accessing capital, especially loans from the bank. Especially loan, and then even the venture capital firms you mentioned, that they find it hard to invest in. And I found that intriguing because they were saying that their counterparts will go to this bank and they find it easy to get loans, start up their business, and everything is okay. Whereas the other guys, when they go, they find it hard to actually access anything. So you've mentioned the financial aspect, which is a huge barrier, because if you don't have sometimes you need money to set up some businesses. And they also mentioned the barrier the ladies actually face as well. So is that the only reason why you think they are not like the people within these communities are not leaping into entrepreneurship? Like, for example, I'm now thinking maybe I'm wrong, because I know doubt is a problem. Doubt affects all of us, and once you have this doubt, it will affect your mindset if you want to go into entrepreneurship. Do you think doubt is a big problem as well? Because some of them will look at their family members and say, "Oh, I've never seen anybody in my family go into entrepreneurship," or somebody within this our community go into entrepreneurship. Why do I think, and how do I think I'll be successful if I take this path?
Is that it? So if you look at the impact from, say, socioeconomic background for some of these people, they've never really had the sort of experiences that's required for things like this. So if you look at somebody who's maybe the first time to ever go to a university within their family, for instance. Now, it's okay to say, right, that person is going to university at maybe, say, 20, whatever, how old they are, But the thing is, learning doesn't start there. Learning doesn't start at university. Learning starts way before, You know, from the moment you're born and you're growing. So the networks you're in, the environment where the support you're getting, the learning you're getting, the skills you're getting, all those things give you an advantage before you get to university. How to do that. So socioeconomic background plays a huge role. You know, we're talking about mentor, and we're talking about, you know, being able to look at somebody and say, well, actually, you know, if this person can do it, I can pull it off. Now, I say all this, but at the same time, we have to be realistic about things, because it doesn't matter what you're trying to do, where you come from, you're going to have issues, you're going to have challenges, you're going to have problems. They're going to be different for everybody else. Now, why I don't have an issue, why I believe these problems are there, or these issues and these factors are there, at the same time, we need to be able to be resilient around these issues and not let them hold us back too much. If you want to do it. So you can't do it. So the reason I'm saying that is you were talking about mindset. Of course it plays a role. It's easier to do something if you've been shown how to do that thing. It's easier to do something if you've been given the tools to do that thing. Of course it's easier to do that. And if you're in that environment. So if you look at somebody who's from that sort of background, for instance, going to a loan, and not straight up, you're just going to notice that the conditions or the criteria required to get that loan, it just puts them out of the picture straight away. Because a lot will not have good credit rating to start with. A lot will not have collateral if it's needed to do that sort of thing, or backing to do it. So they become a financial risk for those providing the loans. You know, so it becomes a vicious cycle around things like that. So it just doesn't only affect the financial side of things, but even just the encouragement side of it. I mean, we say there's the flip side to that. You know, we talked about how a lot of migrants go on to do very well. You know, so if nothing else, people can sort of look at that and think, well, actually, I'm sure they had challenges as well. I'm sure they had challenges in the 50s, in the 20s. You know, and still pull through. There are still challenges today. While, you know, society is trying to catch up with a lot of things, you can't just let that hold you back, especially if you know there's people out there that have done it already.
That's a good one, because you mentioned like you say school doesn't start from the university. I don't know if you've heard of Science Creates. It's in Bristol. So Science Creates, I think it was created by a former scientist that was at University of Bristol. So you have like a lot of firms cropping up over there, and they have this outreach they do. They try to reach out to young kids. You see what I mean? To help them, to groom them to become good scientists and then become innovators as they grow older. Like it's like trying to catch them young at a younger age. So thinking about that, I know I'm not going to go back to other question, but I'm thinking, how can we actually get families within this community to encourage their children to be part of this outreach? Because if we can actually catch them young at 10, 11, 12, by the time they're 19, 20, they may be more confident to say, okay, you know what, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do. And actually, I know myself now, and I can actually go into entrepreneurship now.
I mean, you're right. There's a lot of programs out there at every level, not just higher education, at primary school levels, because I've been involved in a few. I think the pen is dropped. We're trying to get younger people interested in things like this. I mean, I keep going about higher education over because that's my background at the moment. But there are a lot of extracurricular stuff to help them develop the skills we're talking about. And it's like asking a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old to join a sports team, for instance. You know, they learn so much from that. As you know, they learn to deal with other people. They learn to negotiate. You know, it looks like they're having fun, but there's learning that goes with it. Within that background.
I agree.
Now, while it might be difficult for some people in certain situations to say, well, actually, I've got nothing to look up to, you know, behind me to motivate me to do this thing. You know, they can look beyond that. You know, parents can sort of encourage the kids, but it's trying to sell the benefits to them. You know, sometimes when somebody has been through a situation where they're a bit demotivated, asking them to do another thing, you know, you're talking about doubt. When you've got that doubt, you think, actually, I've got doubt in myself, I've got doubt in society, I've got doubt in the system to support this. It's not going to go anywhere. Imagine me sat in front of one of them and reading out all the statistics I was saying earlier on. You're more likely not to do well. You're more like, it's just all negative. But that's how they might take it. Although that's the reality. The reason we're putting these numbers out there is to show the disparity. But that self-doubt can really come in, and you start wondering, so what's the point? So that's where things like mentoring becomes really important. Right from home, you can encourage them to take part in things. You can encourage them to there's a lot of organizations that just focus on young people. There's a lot doing a lot to correct a lot of this disparity and starting really early. There's reputable organizations out there doing it. Engagement is the thing. It's often challenging to engage young people, especially from a choice point of view, if you have to get them to make a choice. So that's why going into schools has become really important, because they're there already. They're all clustered there. And you can start doing things with them. So if you look at things like the Prince's Trust, there's a few out there that sort of look at younger people. It's about engaging them. But because of their age, it has to be in a particular way. They have to be engaged. It has to be a little bit fun for them. But they also have to see the seriousness and the benefits of taking part. So things like that, mentoring is quite important. Just to help motivate them and give them a little bit of a holding hand as they get to do. We don't expect everybody to become entrepreneurs. That's why, but just going through that process, the learning that comes with it is quite useful.
So you said, like, there are so many things going on now to try as much as possible to get young children and young adults as well to get into different entrepreneurship in different ways. But now I'm thinking, when we talk about looking at, because I don't know the statistics, I'm not sure. Like right now, because I know you have a lot of people from the BAME community in healthcare working in the NHS. All right. Do you think healthcare could be a starting point for a lot of them to set up their own companies, or to go into entrepreneurship? And then when we talk about entrepreneurship, do you think most of them will go into just self-employment, or set up like small business enterprise like you mentioned, or like build a startup, or like just be a sole proprietor? Like going into healthcare, what do you think they can actually, what kind of businesses do you think they can actually do to actually scale up entrepreneurship within this community?
I think there are different ways to look at it. I think the first thing would be to just break it down into two in terms of choices. Is it going to be service-based or is it going to be product-based? Is the first thing. My guess would be a lot of it will be service-based because it's healthcare around that. But the reason I say product-based is that there's a lot of people. In fact, that there are two clients I can think of the top of my head, but I won't go into details so I don't give away the confidentiality. Same experience of being in healthcare, but actually developing product just from the experience of being there, a product that can support elderly people. A wearable digital product that can support elderly people. So it can be both ways. I guess it depends on what the idea is, or what you generally want to do, or where your skills lie. So if you work in healthcare, say for instance, doing social care, and that's what you've been doing, and you feel actually, you know what, I've got the skills for this. I've been doing this for quite a while now. You can decide to actually, you know what, I'll do it on a freelance basis, so on a consulting basis. I can set up my own and provide that service to the NHS as a private service provider, for instance. So it really depends on how you look at it. In terms of the legal format, you were saying, are they likely to be micro businesses or are they likely to be self-employed? Again, it depends. It depends on the individual and what they're trying to do, because I guess there's pros and cons to whichever way you want to do it. Someone can do it depending on their idea or what they come up with. They might think, actually, I want to do something at a very small capacity, something that's me. I can run, I can manage by myself and make it really small. So you often see things like that where those people also have other responsibilities. Say at home, there might be carers at home as well. in other places, and they don't want something that will stretch them too much, but also want to do something that might go small as a micro business. It really depends. Some can go self-employed, but it all depends on what you're offering and yeah. So I was just saying it all depends on the on sort of the idea of what the person is trying to do, because in terms of legal structure, it really depends on what works for them. I mean, some of them can decide, a group of them might decide to think, because we want more capacity, we might come together as a partnership and do it that way. Some might decide to be self-employed, do it. A lot of people do. In terms of size, again, I guess it depends on capacity, what they're actually trying to achieve, how big it will be. But that's a sector where I think it's quite attractive. There's a lot of healthcare accelerators all over the country at the moment. So that's a good indication that's an area, the sector that's quite growing. But if you look at the pressure the NHS is on, and a lot of emphasis on health and well-being these days, so it's a very there's an opportunity in that market for people with the skill and ability.
Oh, okay. So we've already mentioned why we think entrepreneurship is important in these communities. But what do you think can be done? We know we've talked about sports and everything they're doing now for young children, but what do you think can be done to promote and advance entrepreneurship within this community?
I think it's two sides. With the community ourselves, I think they need to, I guess, be more proactive in some of the. There's a lot of support out there if people want it, especially when it comes to business support, both from private organizations, government bodies, NGOs. There's a lot out there. I think being proactive about it will be a good thing to start with. But we talked about all these barriers. I think something needs to be done about the barriers as well, so that accessing these things become a little bit easier, or at least comparable to everybody else in the area, because it just provides more opportunities. And if we're looking at this whole social economic issue, I mean, there's a lot of BAME, successful BAME entrepreneurs out there. Right? There's a lot. Yeah. So it's not impossible, really. So a lot of it is people just moving beyond that and just getting on with it. Because you get organizations out there that support these things. And in fact, the one I just talked about, the British Business Bank, for instance, offers dedicated loans to these communities as well. So there's support out there. I think it's wanting to do it and actively seeking support. Actively seeking help, because a lot of people with the sort of socioeconomic backgrounds we're talking about won't have developed this network that a lot of their counterpart would have had, through life. They won't have, had that sort of network where somebody can say, this is what's happening. This is, the best way to go and get fund is this. And because those things make a difference around it. So just a little bit of encouragement, a little bit of mentorship as well for the cohort. Of encouragement, a little bit of hand holding. But the business environment they're going to has to be at least fair. They need to be able to have access to support, to finance, to mentoring. All those things that are out there. They are out there, but you need to be active about it.
So you mentioned mentors and all. Because you said there are a lot of BAME entrepreneurs that are successful out there. Do you think it's possible for us to actually encourage these successful BAME entrepreneurs to actually create like a supportive ecosystem for these young ones that are coming up? At least help in that way they can become mentors to these individuals, and then help them to maybe get their first funding or loan or whatever, anything else they may need. At least let that be that link between the mentor and the mentee there.
This is what I mean by being proactive. Being proactive. I can guarantee you now, Arinze, at the end of this, go and Google Black Mentoring Group. You will find plenty.
Yeah.
You'll find regional ones, you will find local ones, you'll find national ones.
Yeah.
You will find them. There's a lot of BAME business groups around. There's one in Bristol that I'm a member of as well. There's a lot of groups, and some of them are even virtual, where you don't, physically have to leave to travel anywhere to have this mentoring support.
Yeah.
So when I say being proactive is very important, you've got to be proactive, especially if you don't have that sort of network that encourages you to say, this is how I'm going to look at that, I'm going to look at that, I'm going to look for this.
Yeah.
So it becomes quite useful for people to be really proactive and just have a look. A lot of these regions have chambers of commerce, for instance, that provide business support. You can find it. There are national ones, there are regional ones, there are local ones. They're all there. People need to just have to look. There's support out there.
Yeah. Okay. But because of time, so we're going to round off now. So you've mentioned mentorship, so level playing ground for these entrepreneurs. So, but are there any other strategy you think you can actually let these people, let the young ones or anybody who wants to go into entrepreneurship within these communities, any strategy for entrepreneurship success you think they need to know?
Can you be a little bit more specific? Because I'm reading that in so many ways.
I don't know, like, let's say in I'll just use academia for example. Let's say someone goes into somebody just migrated from Africa and this person wants to study in higher education. You see what I mean? There are strategy you tell the person, this is what you need to do to understand the system, to do this. You see what I mean? So you become a successful and maybe get a distinction first. Like, so do you think there's any strategy they need for entrepreneurial success at all? Or is just to try as much as possible, like you said, put yourself out there, be more proactive, and then explore all your options and all these mentorship groups. So what do you think is the strategy here?
So it's the same thing, but I'm going to just double down on it a little bit.
Yeah.
My number one tip will be, if you want to do it, the first thing you try and do is try and do it on the cheap.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, I'm going to talk about all the services out there already. There's a lot of services out there.
Yeah.
And a lot of them will cost you nothing.
Yeah. To
engage with. A few years back, when I sort of got into this game, I quickly realized something there. Because when I started seeing the networks and the groups, because I started working in this sector, I suddenly realized that if you want to do this in the UK, you can do this in the UK.
Yeah.
You can. You just have to look and find and filter through and see what works for you.
Yeah.
So that's my number one tip. Try and do it for cheap. What I mean by that is, find out what's out there.
Yeah.
First, find out what's out there first. Engage with those things. There's really quality support out there from professionals that are obviously funded to do things like this. Go and get them, engage with it. I mean, let's face it, you've got nothing to lose.
Yeah.
You've got absolutely nothing to lose. There's a saying my granddad used to say, and I live by it. I literally live by it. He says he'd rather have skills he ends up not needing than needing skills he doesn't have.
True.
So you've got nothing to lose whatsoever, because this is how opportunities happen. This is how they happen. Sometimes it does happen occasionally where, you suddenly bump into an opportunity and something happens. But you have to be actively looking for opportunity to see opportunity.
Yeah.
You have to be actually looking. So you just can't hang around for it to just
drop in your laps.
Yeah. You have to literally go out there and try and find it. That's my number one tip. Try and do it for cheap, because you can get all this information, engage with all this argument, and suddenly realize, you know what, this is not for me. But that's a good outcome, because you can put a line through something that does not interest you anymore and try and focus on something that does.
Yeah.
You really have nothing to lose. That's my number one tip. And my second tip is be ready to work hard.
Yeah.
Be ready to work hard.
Yeah, because
Um,
when people say entrepreneurship, they think you're just gonna be successful and just relax, isn't it?
it's not a walk in the park.
Yeah,
I can guarantee you, it's not a walk in the park.
yeah,
Because you're everything to yourself.
yeah,
Everything to yourself. You know, if you're employed, for instance, and you're off sick for a week, it doesn't affect the salary.
yeah,
It's still pay at the end of the month. If you're a freelancer and you miss a week's worth of work, what does that do for your balance sheet?
yeah,
For your account at the end of the month, for instance.
yeah,
So it's hard work. I would sort of suggest try and like what you do.
yeah,
Try and have a purpose as to why you're doing it.
Yeah.
And when I say purpose, it doesn't have to be some kind of emotional thing, for instance. It can be the fact that, you know what, this is my only choice. And that's the reason I'm doing it and helping from making it work around that. So have purpose and you're ready to work hard.
yeah,
You're ready to work hard. Try and like what you do. And then do a little bit of a skills audit. You might like it because you're good at doing it, but that's great. You might like something, but realize half the way you don't have a lot of the skills required to do it.
yeah,
Then you start filling in those gaps
yeah,
and grow with it. So that would really be the first thing I'd do as a tip. I just find out what's out there, so you're saving yourself a lot of time and a lot of money. And there's a lot of resources now that people can learn with. You can learn online with some of these things and be at home and just do programs from home and learn how to do these things. Because the advantage society has now is technology.
yeah,
It's just there at your fingertip.
yeah,
Just use it.
yeah. I agree. Wow. This has been very, very insightful and interesting. Thank you, Iheanyi, thank you, because this is all the time we have for this week. But I really, really appreciate you, your time and you coming onto the show to talk to us today.
Anytime.
Yeah, I hope you had a good time though.
It's been interesting and what's the word, cathartic.
Fair. But hopefully, when you have the time, hopefully we'll do this again.
I'd love that.
Yeah. Thank you so much and talk soon.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Take care.
All right.